Parenting is often described as one of the most essential and far-reaching responsibilities a person can undertake. Caregivers hold immense influence over a developing mind, helping to shape an emerging sense of self, moral understanding, and emotional stability. Ideally, parents would provide a nurturing environment that fosters healthy growth and self-confidence. Nevertheless, the unfortunate truth is that many children grow up in households marred by what can be called toxic parenting. Toxic parenting refers to patterns of interaction in which a caregiver's behavior consistently harms a child's emotional and psychological well-being. Before we get into today's video, I'd like you to share any stories you have on toxic parenting, as you'll never know who you'd be helping. Sometimes such harmful conduct arises from unaddressed trauma in the parent's upbringing, an ongoing mental health struggle, or societal and cultural pressures that normalize harsh parenting methods. Regardless of its origins, toxic parenting leaves lasting scars on the child, carrying over into adult life. Emotional neglect, belittling remarks, sarcastic comments about appearance, threats of abandonment, or manipulative behaviors can undermine a child's belief in their right to exist and to be loved, foundations of a child's psyche. A child's psychological landscape begins forming in the earliest phases of life. Before a child learns to speak, they absorb the emotional tone of their household, the smiles, frowns, soothing voices, or harsh accusations. These impressions become internalized, shaping the child's sense of safety, belonging, and love. Ideally, a child experiences consistent emotional warmth and a balance of fair discipline, receiving guidance that respects the budding sense of individuality. When that environment is lacking, or worse, replaced by insults, intimidation, or neglect, the child's perceptions of self and the larger world can be dramatically distorted. Parent-child relationships, especially in early childhood, resemble a mirror that reflects the child's evolving identity. Through this mirror, a child's feelings, thoughts, and actions are validated or dismissed. Compassionate parents help children feel worthy and capable by acknowledging their efforts and offering supportive feedback. By contrast, toxic parents may weaponize this mirror, reflecting only criticism or even apathy, thereby skewing a child's internal sense of who they are. When a child continually hears harmful remarks about their appearance, intelligence, or inherent worth, these statements can become embedded in their psyche. Repeated negative messages risk forming the scaffolding of the child's self-image, leading them to believe they are somehow fundamentally flawed. This can create a fertile ground for disorders like anxiety, depression, disordered eating, and chronic insecurity. This damage does not always vanish once the child escapes the abusive environment or grows up. Many adults carry deep-rooted wounds from childhood that continue to echo in relationships, careers, and personal development. What is toxic parenting? Toxic parenting is characterized by patterns of communication and behavior that consistently inflict emotional, psychological, or even physical harm. These behaviors may not be constant. A parent can be caring one day and cruel the next. However, the defining mark of toxicity is a recurring and severe disregard for a child's emotional safety and dignity. The toxicity often arises from the parent's unexamined issues, leading them to unconsciously or consciously displace anger, fear, or frustration onto the child. Common elements of toxic parenting may include emotional manipulation. Some parents control children by inducing guilt or fear. They might threaten to withhold affection unless certain demands are met, or distort a child's perception of events to maintain the upper hand. Invalidation of emotions is another hallmark. Toxic parents often dismiss or trivialize a child's feelings instead of offering empathy. They might say something along the lines of, "You have no reason to cry," or Stop being overly sensitive, sending the message that the child's emotions are unimportant or ridiculous. Ongoing criticism or ridicule, when remarks are relentless and demeaning, accusing a child of being stupid, lazy, or unattractive, crosses the line into emotional abuse. The cumulative effect of negative labels can be profound. Unpredictable or explosive tempers can leave a child walking on eggshells, constantly anxious about triggering the parent's anger. Failure to respect boundaries is another hallmark. Toxic parents may refuse to recognize a child's need for privacy or autonomy, intruding on every aspect of the child's life and dismissing their rights to self-expression. It is important to note that toxic parenting is not always deliberate. Some parents are under immense stress or grappling with trauma, unknowingly perpetuating these harmful patterns. Yet unintentional harm still affects the child's mental and emotional health, underscoring the necessity for awareness, education, and, when appropriate, professional help. Verbal abuse and emotional harm are potent forms of toxicity because they strike directly at the child's developing identity. Unlike physical abuse, which typically leaves visible marks or injuries, verbal assaults operate in the shadowy realm of emotional experience. Over time, they corrode self-esteem and can establish destructive internal narratives such as "I am worthless" or "I am unlovable." Common forms of verbal abuse that children endure include offensive comments on appearance, insults about a child's body shape, height, hair, or any other aspect of physicality can induce lasting insecurities. A mother or father who calls their child unattractive or mocks their weight plants seeds of self-doubt that can develop into persistent body image problems. Provocative questions meant to humiliate, when a parent repeatedly asks why the child walks or talks in a certain way, hint that they are abnormal or use a mocking tone, internalizing a message of inherent defectiveness. Mean-spirited wishes, such as, "I wish I never had you," or "It was a mistake to bring you into this world," can demolish the foundation of self-worth. Such remarks contradict the unconditional acceptance that a parent is generally expected to provide, leaving the child adrift in guilt, shame, and sorrow, making them feel like a burden. Remarks about how challenging or expensive the child is can cause a child to hide their needs and become overly self-reliant in unhealthy ways, depriving them of the normal care and reassurance that children require. Unhealthy comparisons are another form of emotional harm. Parents who constantly compare siblings or pit their children against peers are likely to foster low self-esteem, competition, and resentment. Children in these scenarios grow up believing they will never measure up unless they become someone else. Labeling or absolute statements, words like useless or lazy, used repeatedly, can become self-fulfilling prophecies, encouraging the child to see themselves through that distorted lens. Threatening abandonment is another insidious form of harm. Children depend on their parents for safety, so threats of leaving or disappearing cause intense anxiety. This anxiety can manifest later in life as clinginess in relationships or fear of closeness due to the constant worry that those who provide love might vanish. Empty promises, breaking promises, undermines trust and teaches the child that the parent's word is meaningless, making it difficult for the child to form secure expectations in future relationships. The short-term impact on children in the immediate term includes signs of emotional distress such as sudden mood swings, withdrawal from activities, or aggressive behavior. They might struggle in school either because they are distracted by turmoil at home or because they have no positive reinforcement to bolster their motivation. Some children might exhibit regressive behaviors such as bedwetting or thumb-sucking if the emotional strain becomes overwhelming. Children living under the persistent threat of criticism or ridicule may attempt to make themselves as inconspicuous as possible, trying to avoid their parents' attention. Alternatively, they may become hypervigilant, preoccupied with trying to please or placate the parent to avert eruptions of anger. In either scenario, the child's developmental tasks, such as learning social skills, exploring personal interests, and fostering self-confidence, are hindered, as survival in a toxic environment takes precedence. Another short-term consequence is a diminished sense of trust, both in the parent and the broader world. The child may feel that they have no safe place to express feelings or ask for help. Even siblings in the same household might become rivals, especially if the parent compares them or sets them against one another. This fractured sense of safety can continue to color a child's outlook, even in settings that should be relatively free from parental influence, such as school or extracurricular activities. Long-term consequences, adulthood, and relationships. The detrimental effects of toxic parenting are not confined to childhood. Many survivors of these environments carry the echoes of their parents' words far into adulthood, shaping the way they interact with colleagues, friends, and romantic partners. Low self-esteem, unresolved anger, and a deep-seated fear of abandonment can make healthy relationship dynamics elusive. Some individuals may oscillate between seeking constant approval and pushing people away when they sense any hint of conflict. Research in the field of developmental psychology shows that children who receive consistent messages of unworthiness or defectiveness often develop crippling self-doubt. They might sabotage their successes because they believe at a subconscious level that they are not truly deserving of happiness or recognition. In romantic relationships, these adults may replicate the toxic patterns they endured as children, either by adopting controlling or belittling behaviors themselves or by choosing partners who mirror the same toxic traits. Thus, the cycle of emotional abuse can continue across generations unless a person takes proactive steps to break free. Moreover, chronic exposure to emotional abuse in childhood can contribute to mental health conditions such as anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, post-traumatic stress, and various forms of addiction. Some individuals turn to substances or other maladaptive behaviors to numb the persistent feelings of shame, fear, or inadequacy. Others might become perfectionists, believing that they can ward off criticism by achieving flawless performance in academics, career, or personal endeavors. Yet no level of achievement can fully compensate for an underlying sense of worthlessness rooted in childhood toxicity. The intergenerational cycle. A distressing reality is that many toxic parents are themselves the products of toxic environments. People often replicate what they know, and harmful patterns of interaction can pass from one generation to the next. A parent who was belittled and demeaned in their childhood might view the world through a lens of harsh criticism, projecting these learned behaviors onto their offspring without realizing there could be an alternative. Breaking this cycle demands self-awareness and a willingness to seek help through therapy, self-education, or supportive relationships. Individuals can learn to recognize the patterns of abuse in their conduct and replace them with empathy and respect. However, this is far from simple, as it often requires unearthing deeply buried emotional wounds. The process may trigger intense guilt, grief, or anger as the person comes to terms with how they were treated and how they, in turn, may have harmed others. When an adult chooses to break the cycle, the impact can be transformative, not only for their children, but also for extended family members. Relatives may begin to question long-standing family behaviors, leading to a collective re-examination of what was once normalized. While not all family members will embrace change, the effect of even one person stepping away from toxicity can plant a seed for broader healing. Cultural and societal factors. Cultural norms and societal pressures significantly influence parenting styles. In some traditions, strict discipline and a hierarchy of respect are so deeply ingrained that any questioning of parental authority might be interpreted as rebellion. While every culture has unique child-rearing practices, it is crucial to differentiate between structure that fosters growth and communication that diminishes a child's worth. Economic hardships, political strife, or limited access to mental health resources can compound the pressures on parents. A caregiver who struggles to survive on minimal means may be in a state of chronic stress, making them more prone to anger or depression. Societies that offer robust social support, such as accessible counseling, healthcare, and parenting programs, can alleviate some of these stresses and reduce instances of toxic parenting. Nevertheless, core principles of respect, empathy, and child welfare transcend cultural boundaries. International organizations devoted to children's rights emphasize that every child deserves a safe and nurturing environment, free from emotional and physical harm. Public campaigns and community workshops can help raise awareness, encouraging parents to reflect on their upbringing and question whether certain inherited practices might be harmful. The role of empathy and emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence in parenting might look like this. Instead of screaming at a child who spilled a drink, the parent calmly addresses the situation, helps clean up, and then discusses how to be more careful next time. This approach neither shames the child nor avoids teaching a lesson. Rather, it strikes a balance between guidance and compassion. By modeling such interactions, the parent provides a template for the child to handle mistakes with accountability and calmness. Complex reasons behind toxic parenting. Although toxic parenting is destructive, it does not always stem from a conscious desire to harm. Sometimes parents are overwhelmed by unresolved childhood traumas and do not know better ways to interact. They might be battling mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, or personality disorders that warp their perception of a child's behavior. Substance dependence can also intensify negative patterns, rendering the parent unable to cope with stress without lashing out. Some parents hold rigid beliefs about masculinity, femininity, or family honor, placing unrealistic expectations on their children. Fearing community judgment, if the child does not meet these expectations, they apply extreme pressure or shame tactics. Such parents often feel trapped, compelled to maintain appearances while disregarding the emotional havoc wreaked on the child. Understanding these factors fosters compassion for all parties involved, but it does not excuse the abuse. Parents remain accountable for the well-being of the children in their care. Recognizing the root causes, however, points the way toward solutions, which might involve therapy, family counseling, or targeted social support. In many cases, acknowledging and addressing the parent's wounds can substantially reduce the likelihood of perpetuating toxicity. Emotional neglect, the invisible form of abuse. Emotional neglect is an insidious variation of toxicity, less visibly dramatic than overt aggression, but equally damaging over the long term. It occurs when a parent persistently fails to respond adequately to a child's emotional needs. Instead of harsh words, there may be silence or indifference. The child might be physically cared for, receiving food, clothing, and shelter, but remain emotionally starved. An emotionally neglectful parent may not celebrate the child's achievements, comfort them when they are afraid, or engage in meaningful conversations. Over time, the child internalizes a sense of invisibility or unimportance, which can lead to difficulties in recognizing and asserting personal emotions in adulthood. This can make it a challenge to form genuine bonds or trust in relationships. Emotional neglect also fosters perfectionism, as some children strive to become good enough, to finally attract a parent's attention or affection. Despite its subtlety, emotional neglect is every bit as harmful as explicit verbal abuse. Therapy for survivors often focuses on identifying how their emotional development was stunted and learning new methods of self-soothing, emotional expression, and boundary setting. This is a gradual process, but understanding that neglect is a form of abuse can be the catalyst for seeking help. Recognizing toxic patterns. Acknowledging that one's parent is toxic, or that one is a toxic parent, can be a painful realization. Children, especially younger ones, often idolize their parents, assuming they have their best interests at heart. This innocence makes it particularly difficult for a child to reconcile abusive behavior with the assumption that my parents love me. Similarly, a parent who has always believed in the virtue of strict discipline might struggle to see how their conduct crosses a boundary into cruelty. Signs that a parent might be toxic include persistent belittling or name-calling that goes beyond occasional anger, habitual threats of emotional or physical harm, chronic disregard for the child's emotional state or autonomy, and gaslighting, in which a parent denies the child's reality or manipulates facts. A pattern of broken promises and unreliable behavior further indicates toxicity. For survivors, understanding these signs can bring about a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because they finally have an explanation for deep-seated feelings of worthlessness or pain. Sadness because it means accepting that a primary caregiver, AUE, person meant to nurture and protect, inflicted harm instead. Nonetheless, this recognition is a critical step toward healing because it names the problem and opens the door to seek support or intervention. Boundary setting and possible estrangement. Not all survivors of toxic parenting choose to maintain close ties with their parents once they reach adulthood. For some, healing requires strict boundaries or even complete estrangement, especially if the parent continues to be abusive or denies any wrongdoing. This decision can be fraught with guilt and societal judgment, as many cultures regard family bonds as sacred. Nonetheless, prioritizing mental health is essential, and in certain cases, limiting or severing contact may be the healthiest option. Even when survivors keep the relationship, setting firm boundaries about acceptable communication and behavior is vital. Such boundaries might include refusing to engage in conversations where the parent resorts to insults or leaving a gathering, if the toxic behavior escalates. The mere act of establishing and enforcing boundaries can empower survivors, affirming that their emotional well-being is worthy of respect. The role of self-compassion. A common hurdle in recovery is self-blame. Children naturally depend on their parents' judgments, so if a parent repeatedly conveys that the child is unlovable or incompetent, the child may internalize that message. Many adults continue to feel shame for having been problem children, failing to recognize that their parents' demeaning remarks were baseless or driven by the parents' issues. Practicing self-compassion helps reframe this narrative. Self-compassion involves extending the same kindness, empathy, and understanding to oneself that one would offer to a cherished friend. Survivors learn to see themselves not as deeply flawed individuals, but as people who endured abuse and are working to heal. This perspective reduces the burden of shame and fosters a mindset conducive to growth and forgiveness, both for the self and, if possible, for the parent. Parenting styles and the gray area. While toxic parenting is generally clear in hindsight, many people are confused about where to draw the line between strict but caring discipline and actual abuse. Some parents think, "I'm just being firm," or "I'm pushing them to be their best," without realizing they are crossing boundaries into harmful territory. Child development experts categorize parenting styles in various ways, but an often cited framework discusses styles that range from more responsive and empathetic to more authoritarian or neglectful. A healthy style, sometimes called an authoritative approach, provides guidance, sets boundaries, and enforces rules, yet does so with warmth, consideration, and room for the child's viewpoint. In contrast, an authoritarian approach might demand unquestioning obedience while offering little emotional support. A permissive approach might not set any boundaries at all, which can also be detrimental. Toxic parenting generally goes beyond mere strictness. It involves humiliation, inconsistency, and deliberate or unintentional psychological harm. Parents who are merely strict but loving maintain an undercurrent of respect and empathy, ensuring the child understands the reasons behind rules and discipline. Toxic parents do not typically encourage open dialogue, nor do they respect the child's inner world. Instead, they often use communication primarily as a tool for control or manipulation. Creating a support network for children. If a child is trapped in a toxic environment, outside support can be a lifeline. Teachers, school counselors, coaches, or extended family members can play crucial roles in mitigating the damage by providing a safe space to talk and a reliable source of positive reinforcement. They can show the child that not all adults are unreliable or hostile. Many communities offer programs or clubs, such as sports teams or art classes, where children can experience camaraderie and success unrelated to home life. The sense of belonging and achievement gained through these activities can counterbalance negative messages from a toxic parent. While such efforts cannot completely undo the harm, they can serve as protective factors that reduce the severity of long-term effects. Prevention strategies. Preventing toxic parenting before it begins is a powerful approach. Public health campaigns and educational programs that teach coping skills, emotional intelligence, and child development can help aspiring parents prepare for the challenges of raising children. Many people enter parenthood with little awareness of how their unresolved issues might surface under stress. By promoting self-reflection and mental health support early on, society can reduce the incidence of parent-child toxicity. Parenting classes offered through community centers, hospitals, or faith-based organizations can introduce alternatives to harsh discipline. These classes may include lessons on managing one's frustration, communicating effectively, and setting appropriate boundaries without resorting to threats or cruelty. Prospective parents can also benefit from therapy or counseling before having children, especially if they suspect that their background includes unresolved traumas. By focusing on preventative measures, communities can help break the cycle of abuse even among those who grew up in toxic households. Education and support can pave the way to a kinder, healthier style of parenting for the next generation. Understanding the child's perspective. One key to dismantling toxic behaviors lies in recognizing the world from the child's perspective. Children do not possess the adult capacity for emotional regulation or analytical thinking, nor do they have the same level of autonomy. They rely on their parents for survival, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. If the individuals meant to protect and guide them are the source of toxic parents might rely on this conflict to maintain control, shaming the child for pointing out abuse. You must not love me if you accuse me of such things. Learning to hold two truths at once, that a parent can be both beloved and abusive, can help survivors navigate complex emotional landscapes. Therapy frequently involves validating the fact that anger and love are not mutually exclusive. Understanding that a child's natural inclination to love a parent does not negate the harm inflicted allows survivors to process grief without feeling disloyal to the family. Therapeutic approaches for recovery. Individuals in adulthood who recognize they were raised by toxic parents can explore various therapeutic modalities to aid recovery. Cognitive behavioral therapy helps challenge self-defeating beliefs such as, "I am inherently unlovable." Dialectical behavior therapy emphasizes emotional regulation and mindfulness, equipping survivors with tools to handle emotional flashbacks or panic attacks. Psychodynamic or insight-oriented therapies delve into the root causes of maladaptive patterns, unearthing childhood experiences for fuller understanding and resolution. Additionally, family therapy can sometimes be valuable if the toxic parent is willing to participate. However, this avenue requires the parent to acknowledge the harm they have caused and commit to change. In many situations, toxic parents refuse accountability, making it more constructive for survivors to focus on individual therapy and self-healing. The strength of resilience. Despite the deep scars inflicted by toxic parenting, children and adults display remarkable resilience. Human beings have an innate capacity to adapt and persevere under adversity. With support, therapy, and self-reflection, many survivors become empathetic, insightful individuals who are determined not to repeat the same mistakes. They may become advocates for children's welfare, using their experiences to educate others about the realities of emotional abuse. Resilience does not mean the survivor is unaffected by the trauma. Rather, it signifies that they can reclaim agency over their life's direction, transforming pain into empathy or turning adversity into motivation. A survivor may channel their experiences into creative outlets, writing, painting, or music, fostering a sense of purpose and healing. Breaking free. A practical guide. Survivors who sense the lingering grip of a toxic childhood might wonder where to begin their journey toward wholeness. While each path is unique, the following steps are common starting points. Acknowledge the reality of past harm. This involves letting go of excuses or justifications for parental behavior. Recognition of abuse is the foundation for healing. Seek professional support. Therapy can offer strategies for coping with flashbacks, distorted self-images, and anxiety. Whether individual or group-based, professional help provides structure and guidance. Build a support system. Trusted friends, partners, or mentors can provide daily encouragement. Sharing experiences helps dissolve feelings of loneliness or shame. Experiment with boundaries. Practice saying no when a toxic parent attempts to overstep. Decide how much contact is emotionally safe. Communicate limits calmly but firmly. Develop self-care routines. Engage in mindfulness, journaling, exercise, or creative hobbies. These outlets help process complex emotions and reduce stress. Celebrate incremental progress. Healing is not instantaneous. Survivors may experience setbacks, but over time, improvements in self-esteem and emotional stability become more apparent. Ultimately, escaping the shadow of toxic parenting is both a personal endeavor and a societal concern. Each individual who heals helps erode the cultural acceptance of emotional abuse, in turn modeling healthier ways of relating and influencing future generations to communicate with empathy and respect. Toxic parenting stands in stark contrast to the nurturing, supportive environment that children deserve. Emotional and verbal abuse can leave lasting imprints, altering the trajectory of a child's development and sowing seeds of insecurity that may flourish in adulthood. The lingering pain underscores the immense power parents wield, along with the critical importance of wielding that power responsibly. Families and communities can foster healthier relationships by naming toxic patterns, understanding their causes and consequences, and seeking pathways for prevention and healing. This journey involves self-reflection, social support, and often professional assistance, But it starts with a simple yet transformative act, recognizing that no child should shoulder the weight of a parent's unresolved anguish. Children raised in loving, empathetic homes have a far greater chance of developing the resilience needed to face life's challenges. They learn to trust their emotions, communicate openly, and build relationships rooted in mutual respect. In contrast, those reared under toxic scrutiny or indifference must expend additional energy on learning destructive internal messages before they can fully engage with life's opportunities. Yet all is not lost for those harmed by toxic parenting. Survivors frequently demonstrate remarkable courage and insight, channeling their experiences into personal growth and becoming advocates for change. Their voices, alongside the efforts of educators, mental health professionals, and community leaders, can disrupt harmful cycles, paving the way for a future where every child is treated with dignity and compassion. If there is one takeaway from this extensive exploration, it is that words matter. A parent's communication, its tone, intent, and consistency, carries immense significance in a child's life. While physical well-being is critical, emotional well-being shapes the lens through which a child perceives reality. Toxic parenting distorts that lens, sometimes with tragic consequences. Conversely, healthy parenting, characterized by respect, empathy, and responsible guidance, nourishes a child's core sense of worth and offers a foundation for a fulfilling life. Let this knowledge serve as a call to action. Every act of kindness, every moment of genuine listening, and every compassionate boundary set by a parent, teacher, or mentor contributes to a collective shift away from toxicity and toward understanding. Through awareness, education, and ongoing dialogue, we can help ensure that the next generation grows not under the dark cloud of toxic words, but in an atmosphere that nurtures and celebrates the intrinsic value of every child. Discipline versus emotional abuse. A common misconception is that these are the same. However, true discipline stems from a desire to guide a child's moral and behavioral development in a way that respects their dignity and fosters growth. Emotional abuse, in contrast, relies on humiliating, threatening, or devaluing children, ultimately stifling their emotional well-being. Parents who employ discipline effectively often do so by calmly explaining the reasons behind household rules, offering constructive consequences for misbehavior, and reinforcing positive actions with praise or acknowledgement. Emotional abuse might masquerade as discipline when parents claim they are merely correcting or teaching the child a lesson, but their methods lack empathy or long-term developmental benefit. Scaring a child into submission or making them feel inherently bad for making mistakes achieves short-term compliance, but damages the child's ability to internalize healthy boundaries. True discipline, by contrast, encourages the child to reflect on their choices, teaches empathy for those affected by their actions, and emphasizes learning over punishment. When we untangle these distinctions, it becomes clear that methods aimed at controlling children through intimidation or emotional harm are far removed from nurturing, respectful guidance. Defense mechanisms develop in children exposed to toxic parenting as a means to survive emotionally perilous environments. One such mechanism is dissociation, where the child mentally distances themselves from hurtful situations, numbing their emotional reactions by detaching from reality. While this strategy helps them heal from unbearable pain, it can lead to difficulties in later life when processing genuine emotions. Another common defense is people-pleasing. If a child learns that the only way to avoid emotional punishment is to constantly cater to the parent's whims, they may grow into an adult who struggles to assert their own needs, living in fear of displeasing others and sacrificing personal boundaries to maintain harmony. Some children take on a caretaking role, becoming parentified, assuming adult responsibilities and worrying incessantly about stabilizing the household. While this creates a temporary sense of control, it robs the child of a carefree childhood and can result in burnout and resentment. Denial is another mechanism, where a child persistently minimizes or rationalizes the parent's toxic behavior to preserve the familial bond. Even as adults, these individuals might dismiss their suffering, attributing it to normal family life. By shining a light on defense mechanisms, survivors can gradually confront repressed pain, learning healthier ways to cope with emotional threats. The role of reparenting. Oneself as an adult, one therapeutic concept gaining attention for survivors of toxic parenting is reparenting. This involves adults learning to provide themselves with the nurturing, compassion, and safety they never received as children. In many therapy sessions, the individual is invited to visualize their childhood self, often referred to as the inner child, and offer that younger self the empathy and reassurance they lacked. Techniques can include writing letters to one's younger self, self-guided meditations, or journaling exercises focused on comforting the injured inner child. Reparenting strategies encourage survivors to validate their own emotions rather than suppress them, developing healthier self-talk by shifting away from internalized criticism toward gentle encouragement. By repeatedly offering themselves what they wish their caregivers had provided, survivors slowly reshape their emotional landscape. This approach not only boosts self-esteem, but also reduces destructive coping mechanisms. Critics caution that the process must be guided carefully, ideally with the help of a mental health professional, since confronting childhood traumas can be destabilizing. Yet, for many survivors, reparenting stands out as a powerful way to integrate past experiences and cultivate an authentic sense of self-worth. Advice for professionals and community leaders. Teachers, social workers, healthcare providers, and faith leaders often stand at the front lines when it comes to detecting and intervening in toxic family situations. They have the opportunity to observe children's behavior, academic performance, and emotional well-being over time. By educating themselves on the hallmarks of emotional abuse, these professionals can spot red flags and direct families to appropriate resources. Gently broaching the topic of parenting with caregivers requires sensitivity. Lecturing or condemning parents outright may cause defensiveness. Instead, professionals might start by highlighting a child's strengths and potential, and then suggest constructive parenting strategies or referrals to family counseling. They can emphasize that seeking help is a sign of strength, not failure. Community leaders can also organize workshops, support groups, or seminars on healthy communication within families. These events may feature talks by mental health experts, role-play exercises for conflict resolution, and information about local support services. When communities openly discuss and address toxic parenting, they reduce the taboo that often keeps these issues hidden behind closed doors. The more awareness there is, the more likely struggling parents and children can receive timely support. Global perspectives on legislative measures. Policymakers across the world debate how best to protect children from psychological harm. Child welfare laws, while more commonly known for addressing physical or sexual abuse, increasingly acknowledge emotional abuse as a legitimate concern. In certain areas, legal definitions of child maltreatment explicitly include emotional harm, granting Child Protective Services the authority to investigate and intervene. Enforcement remains challenging, however, since evidence of emotional abuse can be subtle and may rely heavily on personal testimonies rather than clear physical indicators. Critics of legislative approaches argue that increased involvement of authorities in family matters could infringe on parental rights, while others assert that while legislation is essential, it must be paired with preventative and supportive measures addressing root causes such as poverty, mental health crises, and generational trauma. Ultimately, the global conversation underscores a tension between safeguarding children's rights and preserving family autonomy. Many child advocates view the recognition of emotional abuse in legal frameworks as a crucial step toward validating survivors and holding toxic parents accountable. Addressing the parent's mental health while prioritizing the child's well-being is also crucial. It is important to recognize that some toxic parents are grappling with serious mental health disorders, untreated depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, or personality disorders can amplify stress and impair emotional regulation, leaving the parent poorly equipped to respond calmly to a child's needs. Identifying and treating these conditions may significantly reduce toxic outbursts. Holistic family interventions often include mental health assessments for parents and guardians, medication therapy, or support groups to help parents develop healthier emotional coping mechanisms. Family-based approaches might also teach communication skills, replacing yelling or blame with collaborative problem-solving. A vital insight here is that intervention need not be adversarial. The goal is to protect the child while assisting the parent in becoming more stable, self-aware, and capable of healthy attachments. In cases where a parent refuses treatment or remains unstable despite interventions, Child Protective Services or legal action may be required to secure the child's safety. Differences between emotional and physical abuse. Physical abuse leaves visible marks such as bruises or broken bones, often making it easier to identify and address. Emotional abuse, however, can remain hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy, frequently involving words, tone of voice, and emotional distance rather than physical harm. Yet, both forms of abuse can be equally devastating. In many instances, emotional scars persist even after physical injuries heal because they undermine the child's sense of self-worth and reality. Emotional abuse can also be coupled with physical abuse in particularly abusive households. In those cases, the child endures both the fear of physical harm and the degradation inflicted by toxic words or neglect. Recognizing emotional abuse as a legitimate and severe form of mistreatment is a crucial step in supporting all facets of a child's well-being. So, the wounds. Heal practical self-help. Tips survivors often ask how they can begin soothing emotional wounds if therapy or formal interventions are not immediately accessible. While professional help is highly recommended, certain self-help practices can lay the groundwork for healing. Daily affirmations, repetition of positive statements, can challenge internalized negative beliefs. For example, telling oneself, "I am worthy of love," or "I deserve happiness" several times a day. Mindfulness and breathwork techniques that focus on grounding the individual in the present moment can reduce anxiety triggered by memories of abuse. Simple, mindful breathing, for instance, encourages the survivor to notice each inhale and exhale, helping dissipate racing thoughts. Creative expression activities like painting, writing, music, or dance serve as channels to process buried emotions. The symbolic nature of art allows survivors to externalize and transform their pain. Reading and education, books, articles, or online resources about childhood trauma and healing can offer insights that normalize the survivor's experience and illustrate possible coping strategies. Physical activity, such as gentle exercise like yoga, tai chi, or walking, can soothe the nervous system and release pent-up stress hormones. Over time, regular movement improves mood and energy levels. These strategies do not replace specialized care offered by mental health professionals, but can build resilience and foster a sense of control, which may be especially important for those who felt powerless growing up. Encouraging accountability. Among parents, confronting a toxic parent about their behavior is fraught with risk, especially if that parent remains defensive or unrepentant. Nevertheless, some parents are open to feedback once they realize the gravity of their actions. They might experience remorse, seek therapy, or commit to parenting classes. Such parents can learn to apologize sincerely, repair ruptures in the relationship, and replace unhealthy habits with respectful forms of communication. Accountability is not about scapegoating or humiliation. It is about recognizing the consequences of one's actions and making amends. Children who witness a parent take responsibility for their mistakes can begin to heal as they see that their pain is acknowledged. This process can be long and uneven, but every genuine effort at accountability helps rebuild trust. If the parent remains entrenched in denial, survivors may need to protect themselves by enforcing boundaries or reducing contact, as repeated attempts at forcing accountability may do more harm than good. Creating positive family rituals. For families committed to moving away from toxic patterns, creating new positive rituals can help foster closeness. These rituals could involve shared mealtime discussions, weekend outings, or gratitude circles where each family member shares something they appreciate about the others. Structured activities promote healthy communication and encourage the child to express themselves without fear. This also provides opportunities for the parent to practice newly learned skills, such as active listening or offering constructive feedback. By weaving these rituals into daily or weekly routines, the family gradually redefines its narrative. Instead of centering interactions around criticism or silent tension, they focus on mutual respect and warmth. This transition requires patience, and setbacks are inevitable. But consistent effort can shift the emotional atmosphere of the household toward one of genuine support. The power of public awareness campaigns. Across the globe, nonprofit organizations, activists, and governments run campaigns to highlight the effects of emotional abuse on children. Public service announcements, social media movements, and documentary films often feature the testimonies of survivors who bravely share their stories. These accounts can be eye-opening for those unaware of the severity of toxic parenting, putting a personal face on the issue and inviting empathy. Campaigns also motivate communities to question harmful norms. Equally important, survivors who see public discussions of childhood emotional abuse may feel less alone, recognizing that help and validation exist beyond the walls of their homes. In this way, public awareness campaigns create safer environments by making it clear that emotional abuse is neither invisible nor acceptable. Healing from toxic parenting. Healing from toxic parenting is not a quick sprint, but a long-distance journey filled with unforeseen challenges. As survivors progress, they may uncover deeper layers of pain, question long-standing beliefs, and face emotional setbacks. However, every step forward, no matter how small, represents a victory against internalized negativity. Over time, self-awareness grows, coping skills sharpen, and new relationships begin to form based on mutual trust rather than fear. Hope emerges not only from personal transformation, but also from witnessing the efforts of a worldwide community. Parents seeking to break generational cycles, advocates demanding child-centered legislation, and mental health professionals dedicating themselves to early intervention. All contribute to a culture in which children are cherished and protected. Though the road is long, the collective movement toward acknowledging and addressing toxic parenting can indeed foster conditions under which children can flourish. By engaging in honest reflection, parents can reshape their relationships with their children, substituting control and insult with empathy and encouragement. By extending compassion to themselves, Survivors can finally reclaim the childhood they lost in spirit, if not in time. By speaking out against emotional abuse, communities worldwide can ensure that the next generation grows up hearing words of affirmation instead of words that wound. In the end, the key to dismantling toxicity lies in recognizing the inherent dignity of every child. No child deserves to be harmed by those entrusted with their care. As we expand our understanding of emotional and verbal abuse, we can transform not only individual households but also the very fabric of society, forging a brighter, more compassionate future for all.